Yes, so we're going to talk about nomination pools, which has already been mentioned a bunch of times in this 2 days, but this will be like a more official introduction to them. And pools are already live on Kusama, as already mentioned. They're coming to Polkadot in the next, in the near future, once all the testing on Kusama is done, once all the chaos has been over. And I could use this 20-25 minutes to go over the details, specification of the pools. But truth is, you can already read about all of that online. There's the wiki pages, there's documentation. And instead, I want to use this opportunity to tell you the story of why the pools are here and what value they bring to Polkadot's NPoS system. NPoS also stands for Nominated Proof of Stakes, as you. So let's begin by looking at an average day, business as usual day in the world of Polkadot Validators. You have the validators in this ring shape. The relay chain blocks come in and they're authored by these validators, and they're also validated by the same group. You also have a bunch of parachains, 3 of them here. And these validators are partitioned into smaller groups called cores. You can see the blue thingies here. And they're sharing their security or providing a service to these parachains as well. And that service is essentially these cores, aka groups of validators, are validating the blocks of these parachains as well. Also, the cores swap over time. So a parachain is receiving the service or is having its block validated by one core now and then another core later. So these cores always rotate. So continuing on this analogy, Polkadot is in some sense a secure validator set as a service, and the clients are parachains. It's kind of like one of the value propositions of Polkadot. This is also where the shared security term comes from. It's one security umbrella for everyone, all parachains and the relay chain. And I want to assert that a good service provider is one that has at least 2 properties. I mean, you can have more properties, but these are the 2 that I want to focus on in this talk. A good service provider must have a high-quality service, and that high-quality service must remain consistent over time. A typical example, you get internet from an ISP, and well, first of all, it needs to be what you ask for. It needs to have the quality that you required, and also that quality must remain constant or consistent over time. You don't want your speed to be very good today and very shitty tomorrow, or vice versa. So let's look at these 2 properties now, having high quality and consistency, and see how they translate into Polkadot and its validators. Having high quality in a proof-of-stake system essentially means having a high degree of economic security. Economic security is why proof-of-stake blockchains exist, and why we managed to replace proof-of-work with them with consuming a lot less resources. Essentially, we lock a large amount of value-bearing tokens somewhere, and we have this capital, this value, to be prone to being slashed, and this incentivizes validators not to misbehave. Again, this is very important, economic security. It's why proof-of-stake blockchains exist and why we can trust them, why we trust them to be secure. And consistency. So this goes back to that detail that I mentioned, that validators are having their blocks being validated by groups of parachains are having their blocks being validated by groups of Polkadot validator called cores. And these cores swap over time. So essentially what we want is similar cores. So if you as a parachain have your blocks being validated by core A and the next hour core B, you don't want core A to be very secure and core B to be not so secure. As a parachain, you want the security that you're receiving from the relay chain to be always consistent. Again, this boils down to having similar cores. So now, this was the previous statement or assertion. Now let's take it one step further. A good relay chain is one that has a very high degree of economic security and evenly distributed between the validators that it has. Or making it a little bit more concrete, a good validator set is one that has a high maximum amount of, in this case, dots or tokens staked, and minimum variance between them. So you have a validator set with a lot of economic security, but each individual validator or each subset of validators being roughly equal in terms of security. And all security means economic security, at least in this talk. So, NPoS, the nominated proof-of-stake system of Polkadot, it's doing a bunch of things, handling slashes, rewards, blah, blah, blah. But one of its tasks is to find and elect a validator set that has these properties. And let's look at an example to see how it does it. So you have, for example, in this case, 3 nominators, Alice, Bob, and Eve, and they each have a certain amount of dots. You also have 3 validators, and you want to select 2 out of these set of 3 validators. So you want to select 2 out of 3 here. And these dashed lines are basically the nomination intentions that Alice, Bob, and Eve set. It's their nominate transaction, essentially. And now we want to find the answer. We want to find the better 2 validators. And how do you go about doing that? So here's one rather random example in which I distributed the stake of Alice, Bob, and Eve as shown in the dashed lines. I hope you can see it. But long story short, validator 1 and validator 2 are the ones who receive more stakes. So kind of intuitively, we want to select these 2. But here's another distribution in which the outcome is different. You have validator 2 and validator 3 receiving more stake, in total 15 and 13. And not only the validators that we selected are different here, the more important detail is that these properties that I talked about, for example, having the total amount of locked stake is also different. In the first green outcome, we had 35, whereas in the purple, yeah, it's purple, the purple one, we had 28. So this is essentially the description of an optimization problem, where you have a multi-input function, and there's a criteria, so there's a curve, and you want to find the maximum of that curve, or you want to find the minimum of it. I don't want to get into the details, but it's a very hard problem to solve, both in theory and practice. And in practice, it gets particularly worse because we're in a resource-constrained environment like a blockchain. And all of this was like my very brief explanation, description of why Polkadot's NPoS has been having difficulties scaling and why it's sort of justified. It needs that extra degree of economic security, and therefore it's utilizing this processing of this graph via some algorithm, and therefore it's having difficulty scaling. And it's also worth mentioning that the NPoS system has grown multiple times. Like for those of you who have been around, like 2 years ago, Polkadot could only onboard 5,000–6,000 nominators. At some point, this went up to like 30,000. At some point, it went a little bit too much, and things broke a little. Now it's stabilized around like 20–25,000. But the point is that processing that NPoS graph, that I walked over, and coming up with an optimal solution out of it is an inherently difficult task to scale, especially if you want to scale it indefinitely. So this brings me to nomination pools, which is a scaling solution to the problems that I just talked about. So we have this similar setup, some nominators and some validators. And the main idea behind pools is that it's difficult to increase the number of nominators that the system can have, but it's very easy, or rather trivial, to group the ones that have the same opinion together and make them seen as one nominator. So essentially, the rest of the system sees this as 3 nominators, whereas the third one is actually a pool that can be composed of 1,000 pool members with the same opinion. I think it's worth emphasizing that pools are not a new type of staking. It's actually a scaling solution on top of the already existing one. Okay. Okay, no, I had more to say here. So some of the details of the pool, which I said I don't want to spend the whole talk talking about them, but I think they're worth mentioning, is that Because I mentioned that pools are the same underlying staking activity, it's also the natural consequence of that the amount of reward and slashing that the pool members are subject to is essentially the same. So I guess TLDR, same rewards that can be earned by joining a pool as being a nominator. More importantly, unlike the number of nominators, which is limited in Polkadot, the number of pools that can exist, and more importantly, or most importantly, the number of members per pool is, as far as practicality is concerned, unbounded. The governance of any chain, or Polkadot or Kusama in this case, could decide to put a cap here if they wish to, but unlike nominators, there is no technical bound here. And I think the last noteworthy detail is that the pools have different roles, which are different accounts that can control that pool, basically. So you delegate to you join a pool, and that pool has a specific account which is declared as the nominator of that pool. And this flexibility essentially allows for more types of, let's call it, trustless, decentralized, collateralized staking, or collective staking. So in the current model, if you want to literally join the opinion of an existing nominator, you only have the option of giving them your fund. Whereas now, if this is a pool, you can actually join it, and you can, without needing to trust that other person, only trust their nomination opinion, not give them actually your fund. Or you can have more interesting use cases. Like there's one example that I've been saying to people in the last 2 days, and I find it interesting. You can have a pool which has a nominator account, okay, the account that controls the nomination of that pool, be an account that's controlled by a DAO that lives in a smart contract parachain, and it does its business via XCM. This is another example. Yeah, so long story short, pools also bring more flexibility for types of collective staking. So, to put it into perspective and compare it with normal nomination again, creating a new nominator now is like creating a unique new opinion. Well, it doesn't need to be unique, but you have the option to create a unique new opinion about the state of the validator set, or assert your opinion about who the good validators are and who should be selected. Whereas being a pool member is essentially like joining an existing opinion. And creating a new opinion, being a nominator, is bounded, more expensive, but joining an existing opinion is unbounded, cheaper, easier to do. So I think the first half of my talk was essentially about these two conflicting criteria. On one hand, you want scalability. On the other hand, you want a lot of economic security. And again, the first half of my talk basically put these 2 points on the graph, that the existing proof of NPoS of Polkadot is very secure in terms of economic security, but has trouble scaling. Whereas the existing, I put it here as like X asterisk POS, as in like any other POS, but I don't actually mean any other proof of stake system. I mean easier proof of stake systems cannot achieve the same degree of economic security, namely because they don't process all the nomination intentions like Polkadot does, but they have an easier time scaling. And with pools, we're basically targeting to have the best of both. It brings the economic security that Polkadot's original NPoS could deliver and blends it with the scalability of a very simple, flexible, easy proof-of-stake system. Or at least allows for both of them to exist. Depending on how much of the stake in Polkadot goes to actual nomination and how much of the stake goes to pool, this line is a simplification, then this NPoS plus pools might change a little bit, like it become a little bit less secure or be a little bit more secure, but you're basically allowing these two properties to blend together and both of them exist. And lastly, I want to emphasize that this is not the end about scaling Polkadot NPoS as it is. It has been an incredible journey so far. It's been a very challenging task. We're essentially solving a NP hard problem on-chain. Or actually in the current system, we're solving it off-chain, but we're still verifying the solution on-chain. And yeah, it's been like underrated experiment, I would say, in the Polkadot journey so far. And I want to emphasize that this is not the end. The number of nominators, aka the number of unique opinions that can exist about the validator set should and will also increase, but that's a more delicate, time-consuming task, and it will come in the future. But we prioritize pools to address the main solution first, which was inclusivity, or allowing more people to participate in staking. So this has also been, okay, my slides are also a little bit, the K is in the next line, but this is also something that has been talked about sufficiently, I think, in the last 2 days. I want to just bring it up again, that there's been a lot of changes to Polkadot's staking as a whole. There's more to come, as I emphasized. So we wanted to create one domain to make it the entry point for everything staking related, and the dashboard that was already talked about, the algorithm that was talked about yesterday. We have a monthly newsletter about staking, and many more resources will be from now on in staking.polkadot.network. It's under construction, but there's already a few links to the existing things in it. And yeah, that's it. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay. Does anyone have questions? All right, I'll take it. Oh, I was trying to be like democratic. Saw him first. But
Sorry. Hi. How does the nominator pool select which validators they're going to choose if it's multiple people that are joining the one pool?
Can you repeat, sorry?
How does the nominator pool select which validators they're going to use if it's multiple people joining the pool? Do they like vote at the start, or?
No. There is a role for each pool has a role that is the nominator of that pool, and that role decides who the pool is nominating. The interesting thing is, and the typical use case here would be that the person who creates the rule would set a clear strategy of, okay, I'm creating this pool and I believe in these values and I'm going to validate these people. But there's still a similar degree of like scrutiny and trust that a nominator has to have in a validator. Like as a nominator, you need to know that the validator you're validating is not gonna, have a bad infrastructure. They're not gonna misbehave. A similar connection also exists between the pool member and the pool. But the interesting thing is, as I mentioned, the pools allow for more flexibility here. So the nominator of a pool can be a parachain, can be a contract on a parachain, or even more interesting, can be actually no one, which means this pool is never going to change its nomination. You can join it, it's never going to change. Or it can be one that, rest in peace, council is not going to exist that much longer, but the governance of the chain controls. But yeah, it's not a DAO structure where the members vote on who the pool nominates. By joining a pool, you're subscribing to an existing opinion. You're no longer creating your own.
Hi, thanks for the talk. Is it a risk if the number of nominator pools converges to a small number? Let's say if there was only 2 nominator pools and everybody decided just to delegate their nomination to them, and if so, how do you get around that?
Yes, that could be a problem, but so you're basically saying there's one pool and everyone decides to join that. Yeah, well, that's like saying, what if all nominators decide to select the same 16? Yeah, that would be problematic. I'm thinking of if there's there's clearly incentives. Maybe I didn't talk about this. So in the early version, or in the first implementation, we actually didn't include any commissions in the pool. But this is pretty trivial to add. But we speculated that there's already enough already enough good incentive for lots of entities to create diverse pools. If you're running a validator or validators, creating a pool that only selects your validator is actually like a new door that you open and allow stake to come to your pool. So while I guess I can't prove otherwise, I strongly think that there will be incentives for people to create more diverse pools and not everyone going to just the one. I think that's the best example. Like if you're running a validator group, then I think, or if you're just running one validator, one thing that could happen is that you could have groups of validators that each have like 1 or 2 validator to come together, kind of like form a coalition maybe, and then they create a pool that only validates them.
Hi, and thank you for the presentation. It was really interesting. I was wondering, do you have any plans to promote to nominators the usage of the pools? Because as you said, it's much more scalable. And clearly the network wants nominators to nominate pool rather than directly validators.
It's the same problem as before. Sorry, the speakers are that. Can you say a bit louder?
Oh, I'm sorry, can you hear?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just asking, do you have any plans to promote pools more than direct validators? As you say, it's much more scalable.
Yeah.
And so is there any plan to maybe incentivize nominators to go to pool rather than single validators?
Yes. So I don't have concrete ideas, but yeah, I definitely, this actually is part of my speaker notes, which I kind of skipped. I think it would be an interesting future if every nominator who thinks they're doing their job well would transform themselves into a pool, and this basically allows other people to subscribe to their opinion. This currently has no reason not to be done, I guess. But as I said, there's no extra commission for being a pool operator at the moment. But yeah, this is definitely a plausible future. And it definitely makes the most sense. Like, I guess in some way, the ideal, or one ideal scenario would be that there is no individual nominators, there's only pools. And this is kind of like, there's like 20, 30, 40,000 opinions, and you choose which one you want to join. Kind of like a, I don't know, multi-party parliament system, but lots of parties, more like, a few thousand parties, and you vote for one of them. Yeah, that's an interesting observation. It's something that I hope will happen. And we will try to create incentives for it, if need be.
Hey, Kian, thanks for the talk. So recently the Kusama Pools, currently there are like 64.
Yeah.
And there's been like a proposal to, I think, like lower the amount of like nominees there could be in there or something, or the pools are capped, but doesn't like the staking pools now add the same like limitation as like nominations, as that would increase? That's also like, again, another limit that you would hit.
So the pools have a minimum join bond, but again, this is only for like the sake of allowing it to be set. Doesn't mean that it should be set. There is no practical limit on the number of pools or the number of members per pool. That's yeah, kind of like period. But you can set a limit if you want. For example, let me explain the reason that there's a limit now on Kusama. So the pools are in Kusama as like an early stage beta in some way. And we guess that if there is a bug, if there is an issue, we need to then migrate the data of the pools, for example, to a new format that doesn't include that pool. And guess what? That actually has happened. So it kind of paid out to have a limited number of pools and a limited number of members per pool in Kusama. But this is, even if these limits exist, they're only there to make bug fixes easier, and practically there is no limit. Yeah. Unrelated, but I want to maybe, okay. One more quick note about the differences of the pools. Unlike staking, in pools you claim your rewards yourself as well. Because this is also by design, because we anticipate a lot of people who want to join the pools with very small amounts of stake, and it doesn't make sense for them to be paid out every day, every 2 days or something, because a portion of that reward is going to be the transaction fee. So you basically can join a pool and claim your reward after 2 years if you want.
I just wanted to add an answer to your question with everybody going into one pool. That would basically mean that these 16 validators would have a huge amount of stake that would create enormous incentive to create a second pool, which nominates other validators, and by actually joining this pool you could increase your rewards like crazy. And so there's this factor that there's no economic incentive to join that pool actually anymore.
And there's more detail to that as well, which, again, I mean, it's hard to squeeze into 20 minutes. I mentioned that, for example, the chain, when it wants to select validators, it has some criteria that it prefers. For example, more total stake, less variance. And if the chain ever moves toward like 16 validators having a lot more stake, then the chain will be open to receiving another validator set as like a solution to that graph that I showed, which has a more even distribution. So there are lots of mechanisms to prevent this either in pools or in direct nomination, because the risks that you explained exist in both layers, basically.
Thanks, Kian. I really enjoyed the talk, especially the optimization problem. I was just curious, is there any thoughts around, or is the problem around infrastructure quality when it comes to choosing these validators? Is it a qualitative problem, or is there other ways we can quantitatively look at it?
Yeah, I think that's more something that yesterday's talk would maybe cover. Infrastructure quality. Well, there is now one quantitative way to know a little bit about the infrastructure quality of validators that you choose. As far as I know, the amount of rewards that validator earn, like points for parachain block authoring, has a pretty high correlation, for example, with their network bandwidth. Otherwise, for day-to-day stuff, there is this unfortunate fact that there is not a lot of benefit in running a very good machine as your hardware. And you can maybe get away with running a rather weaker one. I don't have a really good answer to that, actually. If you want a quantitative measure.
Well, one last question, and then we're going to wrap it up. Just here.
Ooh.
Hello? Oh.
Yeah.
So we were previously operating the liquid staking on Kura, and we're hitting limitations that one nominator can only nominate up to 24 validators. That is one of the limiting factors. So I think the same limitation applies to nomination pool. So that means it effectively kept the number of total staking can have in a single pool. Is that right?
Can you, sorry.
So basically, in order to maximize the return, you don't want to overstake for each individual validators. So for example, Kusama right now, the average staking for each validator is something like 4,000 KSM.
Yeah.
So with only up to 24 nominations, then the maximum is 24 times 4,000. Anything more than that will be less rewarding. So you will have this kind of cap, and they will probably limit the nomination pools.
So this would actually be kind of like a natural incentive for a pool to not grow too large, because it wouldn't be able to yield as much staking reward as it would if it were more diverse. So